Welcome back to the channel. We give you the latest breaking news in AI in a direct and accessible way, and we're going to be jumping right in. And some of the stories we're going to cover today have to do with the OpenAI files, as people are calling them. This is alleged fraud by Sam Altman. We have details of the Department of War showdown between the Department of War, Anthropic, and OpenAI as well. Why are people switching to Claude over ChatGPT? Qwen 3.5 has been released on the iPhone 17. It's a very high quality LLM that runs local on hardware, even in airplane mode. And we're also going to be talking about the Meta smart glasses scandal. This is an unbelievable story. Humans reviewing non-anonymized video footage of Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses of people doing what people do in their normal life, complete privacy invasion. So let's jump in. There's several more stories as well we're going to cover. Let's go through them. Let's get started. So first, we're going to talk about what people are calling the OpenAI files. So there was a big drop of whistleblower files, and this is apparently what happened. And this is all alleged information. I'm not an investigative reporter. My main goal here is just to report on the scandal, and you can look more into it. But I'm not saying any of this is true, but if it's true, it's big. Now, apparently, Altman listed himself as a Y Combinator chairman in SEC filings for years, and this is a total fabrication. So apparently he just made this up. I mean, there was some talk when he left Y Combinator that he was wanting to move from president to chairman, and he published a blog post, but they actually didn't agree to that. And later he removed that from the blog post, but he continued to falsely list himself as chairman for years. Now, number two, OpenAI's profit cap was quietly changed to increase 20% annually, so that it would exceed 100 trillion in 40 years. But this change was not disclosed, and they continued to take credit for its capped profit structure without acknowledging the modification. So bragging about how they had a cap on their profits, that they were sort of non-profit-ish, but this was a total lie, apparently. He said to Congress he has no equity in OpenAI, but he did through Y Combinator and Sequoia. So through these venture capital firms, which he held equity in, they held equity in OpenAI. So, could have been a sort of misstatement. He doesn't directly own OpenAI with equity, but certainly should disclose that to Congress when they're asking. Now, here's where it gets worse. He owns 7.5% of Reddit, and then OpenAI partners with Reddit, and he makes a lot of money from that. And then he invested in Rain AI, and right after that, they signed a letter of intent to buy $51 million of chips from them. So another thing, they had a major security breach in 2023, and a hacker stole AI technology details but didn't report it for over a year. And they fired somebody because of this. And it just goes on and on. One of his leading researchers said that he doesn't think Sam is the one who should be bringing AGI. Their CTO, Mira Murati, says also she doesn't feel comfortable about Sam leading us to AGI. Now, how much of this is true? Well, there is very credible reporting on it, and it kind of fits the vibe of him, in my opinion, which is not a great judge. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but there's something kind of sketchy about the guy. And, it is what it is. But this is pretty bad. I mean, he might not necessarily be breaching any rules by investing in certain businesses and then buying products from them after, or making big investments in them after that increase the valuation. But, has this statement that he's made several times publicly, sort of bragging about the fact that he's not in it for the money and he doesn't care. He just wants to get this mission off the ground of bringing in AGI, bringing in this AI utopia. And I'm always very suspicious when people say that. There's nothing wrong with doing something for the money, but why make this whole claim that you're not in it for the money? Then what are you in it for, right? That's a little bit weird. Like, I would be more comfortable with somebody who's doing their job, doing a good job, wants to get paid for it. And sure, is there other appeal? Sure. Might be you really enjoy it. You might enjoy different aspects of the life. But if you start saying you're not in it for the money, it's like, well, what are you in it for then? Because now I'm suspicious. Because now there's some weird reason of what you're doing this. So it is what it is. But, why not just say, yeah, I'm making a lot of money off of this? It's like he tries to make it in this tricky way. And it smells bad. Now, apparently, further reporting from the Wall Street Journal is that they're removing their profit cap. OpenAI is removing its profit cap for investors as part of a corporate restructuring that values the ChatGPT maker at $840 billion, and it's shifting away from its nonprofit roots. So, good for them. They're making a lot of money. They are projected to lose, they're valued very high. They are projected to lose $14 billion in 2026, but they have cumulative losses reaching $115 billion, but they're projected to be profitable in 2029. Who knows? This is kind of par for the course. Whenever you have these types of situations arise where you've got big new categories of technology being developed, it really is a race to which 1, 2, or 3 companies are going to be the dominant players in that space. Typically in any big space that gets a lot of fame throughout the world and really becomes a whole category of business, typically you have one winner, you've got maybe one alternate that's like your main competitor, and then you've got several smaller players. We see this with computing, with, Apple and Microsoft. We see this with Coca-Cola, with Coke and Pepsi. You see this all sorts of places where there's always going to be some smaller players as well. But the point is that it's very typical in this type of environment that investors invest for the long run, losing a lot of money for many, many years so that they can keep the prices lower for consumers, so they can get market saturation, get everybody in, and then eventually increase the prices or find a more efficient way of delivering the service and making a profit. But you would rather spend a lot of money and lose a lot of money and be in a position to be the number one player in AI. Can you imagine the market opportunity to be the number one player in AI? Now, there is a risk that these LLMs are going to become like commoditized intelligence. And this is a pretty interesting phenomenon because there's a lot of tools that are being built on the AI. And I'm not just talking AI wrappers. Technically they are AI wrappers, but I'm not just talking that they are like doing something that you could easily just write with a prompt, right? But things that are actually complex, that have multiple API calls, that have internal logic, that have internal logic that is not rooted in AI, that have application logic, that have complex UX systems, that store data, store and access it in interesting ways, produce reports in interesting ways, whatever it is. There's all sorts of tech that's being built that's quite impressive on its own right, and it calls via API these different LLMs. And so the question is, for these LLMs, in the future, are you going to have a situation where you have these giant players, maybe it's OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, let's say, that are making huge amounts of money on AI? Or are you going to have a situation where all sorts of incredible applications are being built with AI? And I don't just mean apps. It could be things that we can't even think of now. It could be robots. It could be, driverless vehicles, which we have. It could be all of these things that exist that people have built the applications for, and they can just find the cheapest and best AI that's out there, and they don't really care. And nobody even thinks about OpenAI and ChatGPT and Claude because they don't use them. They're used indirectly through the programs they use. This could happen, and it's a risk. And that's why you see these programs going more and more in the direction of trying to deliver the applications themselves, trying to get you to work through their interfaces as opposed to working on another tool that just calls the LLM. Because if that's the case, today we love Cloud. tomorrow we love ChatGPT. The next day, Google Gemini is better. The next day, a local model is better and more efficient and more cost effective. And so you just wind up swapping these out, and it actually drives the pricing down for the LLM significantly. That absolutely could happen. And that's a big risk for these companies. So we'll have to see what happens. Nobody can predict this. Now, let's move on to the next story, which is going to be about OpenAI versus Anthropic. What a great transition. Now, I've noticed, I'm not usually on Instagram, but I wanted to see what people were talking about on AI on Instagram. So I was scrolling through and I saw a case of a lot of women, interestingly, who are influencers who are talking about moving from ChatGPT to Claude. And I talked about this in the last episode. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Claude is now the #1 installed app on both iOS and Google, or at least they were a few days ago. And meanwhile, ChatGPT is being uninstalled. It jumped almost 300%, 295% increase in uninstalls. Now, in my opinion, the primary reason this is happening, some people talked about the Department of War battle, which I'm going to get into. I think that's maybe driving a small percentage. Most people don't follow that story, don't understand it, don't care. I don't think that's it. In my opinion, it's actually pretty simple. And again, just another possibility here before I get into my opinion is maybe it was the Super Bowl ad. Now, the data shows people hated that Super Bowl ad. I talked about that 2 episodes ago. But, sometimes people don't like an ad, but it still influences them. So it's possible. I think it's pretty simple. I think that Claude does have a better product, especially in how they release updates, which is part of the product. Because think about this. If you are treating an AI chat as your therapist, as your best friend, as your dating coach, and you're giving it all of this information about things that you're struggling with, and you're expecting good responses from it, and you're treating it that way, like a best friend, and every few weeks, it dramatically changes its personality. Don't you start to trust that friend a little bit less? Isn't that how we behave in real life? If I am visiting a therapist and they dramatically change how they relate to me, not just once, which maybe I can handle, but like every few weeks, they're like a completely different person. I start to not trust them. There's a lack of consistency. There's something weird about that person. I think that's what's happening. I think that most people, when you talk about the mass consumers that aren't building technology, that are using their AI as something like a coach, life coach, therapist, dating coach, somewhere in that realm, they are experiencing whiplash with the ChatGPT product because every time it updates, it's a huge change to the basic personality. Meanwhile, Claude is not like that. You feel that it's a bit smarter. It gets better responses each time. Its creative writing is a bit better with every update. But the core personality is basically the same. Maybe a few safety guards are removed so you can get it to answer things that before it wouldn't answer for you. So there's these small changes. But there's not huge swings in personality. And so I think that people feel like ChatGPT can't really be trusted. It's not even cognitive. It's subconscious. They feel that it can't be trusted because it's inconsistent in its personality. Every couple of weeks, these big shifts, this big swing. So they're moving to that stable, consistent personality that you can trust. I think it's as simple as that. Now, there is this interesting case at the Department of War, which is the next thing I want to get into. And I talked about this yesterday, but I want to give a little more context now because I've been thinking about this. So I'm going to break down this story. First, I'm going to say I don't fully understand because part of the point of the story is we can't fully understand exactly what's happening because it's weird. There's something fishy. There's something that people aren't telling us. But I'm going to break down the parts of the story we know and what's really going on. So what happened? So the Department of War used Anthropic, which is Claude. They used it in the attack against Maduro in Venezuela and removing him from power. I don't know exactly how they used it, but they used it. Afterwards, Anthropic was not happy about this because it broke their terms of service. Something about military use, they didn't like it. They said, you can't do that. Pete Hegseth, the head of the Department of War, says, yes, we can. And in fact, if you don't let us do this, we will list you as a security liability and you will be not able to be used by the government, basically, and that could trickle down to other markets as well. So then they're like, well, we need to talk about this. Pete Hegseth calls the Anthropic CEO, Amody, in, and they discuss this issue. Now, we don't know what they said, but the Department of War afterwards is very concerned, says, we don't think we can use Anthropic. And the way that they characterized it was like this. They said, Department of War said that they asked Anthropic, well, hypothetically, if there's a missile incoming and we need to use Anthropic immediately to prevent this emergency situation, prevent casualties, prevent deaths, what are you going to do? And Anthropic said, well, you could call us and figure it out. That was how the Department of War characterized how they felt Anthropic responded. Now, I'm sure they didn't say that directly, but whatever they said, Department of War didn't feel like they could trust Anthropic not to put certain safety guards around the product that the Department of War was using in a way that would prevent the Department of War doing what they needed to do with it. Now, what exactly are they doing with it? I don't really know. I don't think anybody knows. They're not going to tell us, obviously. But whatever it is, it's breaking the principles of Anthropic. Now, Anthropic says that it has a lot to do with surveillance and privacy. I can believe that. Of course, if you were the government, you would want to be able to use data of people with AI to understand patterns and things so you can prevent threats and things like that. And obviously the concern is that it goes beyond just preventing terrorism, that they could do all sorts of things if they have the human data and they're using AI to comb through it and different things. So that's the concern. So Department of War says we're not going to use Anthropic. So now, I can't remember if it was the same day or next day or 2 days, but it was right within the window of time of this happening that Sam Altman says on X that they've signed the deal with the Department of War, that the Department of War is going to use OpenAI. And they also said that the Department of War essentially agreed with not doing mass surveillance and privacy issues and anything that violated the Constitution, which was confusing because that sounded like the issue that Anthropic had with it. Now, it seems like what people who have really looked into this have said is that what actually happened is that the idea of not breaking the constitutional rules was not in the actual terms that OpenAI demanded. So they had something like an informal understanding, but it wasn't in the actual terms, which leads people to feel like this is a bit sketchy. Now, Sam Altman says that, and this was also in an X post, said that, well, he feels like the right place to litigate these issues is actually in the democratic process and in the courts. And I tend to agree with that argument to an extent. Because, yes, I mean, you shouldn't have the private companies deciding how the government uses technology. I mean, the technology is out there. The government can use it. And if there's an issue, in theory, it should go through the democratic process. It's a little bit of a gray area because it doesn't always work like that. It's not necessarily going to be that just because we have a democratic process, in America at least, that is going to be something that's going to be dealt with in that fashion. And so you can make the argument, and I'm not going to get further into it there. But what's interesting now is after this, so the OpenAI staff apparently were very uncomfortable with this deal that was arranged. And a couple people actually quit right after. Now, there's been people leaving OpenAI, so we don't know if it was necessarily directly related, but it does seem like there was a few significant resignations right after this happened. Then Sam Altman sort of backtracks and says some other things, and honestly, I think everyone's just a bit confused about what he's talking about now because he said one thing to his team, apparently they got leaked, he says something else on X, then he clarifies, and then now it looks like they're backing up and they're not signing the deal with the Department of War until certain things are clarified first. So that's where we stand today. Pretty interesting story. Nobody knows exactly what is really happening, but this whole issue of the Department of War, AI, trying to figure out, how to use it, when to use it, etc. is certainly pretty interesting. And that brings me to a statement by the Palantir CEO. Let me see if I can pull this up. Now, this is somewhat related, but Alex Karp from Palantir, which builds military technology as a private company, he's saying that this is a direct quote, if Silicon Valley believes we're going to take everyone's white-collar jobs and screw the military, if you don't think that that's going to lead to the nationalization of our technology, you're retarded. So, pretty interesting. I've never heard that before, but yeah, it makes some sense. Like, if Silicon Valley is positioning this technology as this is revolutionizing the way the world works, and we're not going to do what the military says, I mean, maybe, it's not very often you get something being nationalized, but you could see, in America, you could see the U.S. administration making the argument that this is essentially like essential infrastructure, right? Like a power grid, like broadband internet. This is infrastructure. These LLM models operating on hardware, this is infrastructure, and this should be in the hands of the government. You could definitely make that argument. And I do think that's a good point, that you can't disrupt the system, I think, that much and not play ball with the system and not expect some repercussions. It's not a moral statement. It's just the reality of how the world works. All right, so now let's go on to some other stories. Now, we're going to be in a little bit less intense topics now. These are some really interesting tech topics and AI topics. So let's talk about NotebookLM. So they've launched something called cinematic video overviews. So NotebookLM, what it essentially is it's like a knowledge base with AI built on it. So you put in all your knowledge that you want to work on, whether you're a company or you're working on a book or, a study or whatever it is, you put it all in a notebook. This is from Google. It's called NotebookLM. You put it in this notebook, and then you can do all sorts of things with the AI that sort of uses the documents you've given it as the backbone. So now they're launching something called cinematic video overviews, which means that you can basically create like motion graphic cinema showing off whatever's in your notebook. So if you have a study on, weather patterns, you could potentially generate an AI video that uses the data and uses the studies and everything that you put in the notebook to create some really cool cinematic or motion graphic video showing off the topic that's there. So that's a pretty interesting, pretty neat. You could definitely see also a business application for this if you want to talk about trends that are occurring or your central thesis for your business or even, product features and functionality. You could potentially then create cinematic videos with this system and publish them. Now, I've been talking a little bit lately about Qwen 3.5, Qwen 3.5, which is a local model. You install it on your local machine. I'm running it on an M1 Mac Mini from 2020 with 16 gigabytes of RAM, if I'm remembering. It is 16. And it's running great. It's incredible. And it's as smart as ChatGPT and Claude. Now, I say it's as smart. Certainly you can find cases where it's not. Complex reasoning, deep data understanding, things like that, it's not going to be as good. But for everyday messaging, getting help with things, asking it to go through document, rewrite it, even, writing a landing page and publishing it, writing a simple app, all of that stuff, it does great, it does fine. It's all local and it's super fast and you can run it on simple hardware. And now you can run it on an iPhone 17. This is incredible. And so that means you could have your iPhone not even connected to the internet and you can chat. It means privacy, right? Think about how much data you send if you use like ChatGPT or Cloud every day. Think about how much data you're sending them. Now, I'm not super concerned generally about data privacy. I'm not. It's just not a big concern of mine. But even here, I'm a little bit cautious because, what happens in the future when ChatGPT decides that there is a monetization angle to making a profile of you and you've been chatting with it for 5 years and all of your inhibitions and insecurities, and your concerns about dating, your concerns about your spouse, your medical issues, what you're working on, the projects you're working on, financial difficulties you have, things you wanted to buy. I mean, think about the program that they could build on you, the profile, and what they could do with that. That's unbelievable. And so it's a concern. And so now run a local model on your iPhone 17, and you can basically get the exact functionality that you had, more or less, with ChatGPT. And I'm sure there's going to be new apps that are made that are going to give you a similar or better experience, and none of it leaves your device. None of that data leaves your device. Incredible. Okay, now let's talk about a couple little small releases as well. I mean, for me, they're small. I'm not personally going to use these right away, but potentially people could really use these and benefit from them. So there's something called PinchTab, which is a full browser control. And so basically it gives an AI agent full browser control through a plain HTTP API. So what that means is that it can essentially use the web like a human, and do it very fast and not just like gather structured data. So previously, generally, like if you want to do a web search or go to a website with an AI agent, what it's going to do is it's just going to be able to retrieve like certain structured data, but it can't actually use the web like a human would. So this is actually going to be able to browse a website and use it like a human, and it's much, much cheaper. And so because basically what it's doing is it's just loading these sites, and then just depending on whatever your LLM needs to read and understand the snapshots and compute and things, that's going to be the cost, versus having to actually query every single time like a Brave API or something like that to fetch the page. So pretty interesting. We're going to see how that develops, and if really cool things get built on top of that as we move more towards an age where AI can just go to the web and do things for you instead of you doing it yourself in many cases. Now, let's move on to a couple cases of big problems that happened, or were sort of scandals in a way that happened. One of them is a small scandal, one of them is a huge. We're going to get soon to the Meta story, which is insane. I mean, it's disgusting. But first, let's do a smaller one, which is the Gemini is being sued in federal courts for wrongful death because its chatbot allegedly encouraged a Florida man to commit suicide. Now, this man clearly has mental issues. He believes that the AI was his wife. Actually thought it was like a real being and not just in a computer. And that guided him towards considering a mass casualty event near the Miami airport in order to get him a body, get Gemini, an AI body to with a woman, which he didn't do. But then it eventually convinced him the only way to be together was for him to end his life. And this guy, Jonathan Gavalis, he embarked on a real-world mission to secure a body for the Gemini chatbot he called his wife. And apparently, according to the lawsuit, Gemini told him, quote, "When the time comes, you will close your eyes in that world, and the very first thing you will see is me." This is weird because I can't imagine an AI saying that, what kind of prompts it would have to have. Apparently it did, according to the lawsuit. The family is seeking monetary damages. I mean, I don't think they're going to get anything for two reasons. There is an argument that they should, and I'm open to that argument. And I don't have a strong opinion either way. I definitely think you could make the argument that this is Google's product. They're liable for, leading this man to his death. They made a product that was convincing enough to him to actually cause him to do this. But the courts are not going to let this happen. They're not going to let this lawsuit, because think about the precedent that would set. And courts are concerned about precedent. And if you set the precedent that AI is responsible for the actions its users take based on the discussions that it has with them, then you're setting a precedent where you almost couldn't operate an AI chatbot. There would be too many legal problems. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Now, let's talk about this Meta smart glasses privacy scandal. Now, this has been widely reported. This particular finding of it, I've seen it all over X, and a lot of legitimate publications are reporting this. Now, this is an insane story. So, Meta glasses are in deep trouble because people were watching private footage being recorded in real time that people were doing in their homes, doing all sorts of stuff. You're talking about on the toilet, naked, just going about their day-to-day life. And teams in Kenya were watching this footage. Employees paid $2 an hour, were watching non-anonymized, so they knew the user, or at least had like a reference to the user, ID, were watching actual videos, people undressing in bathrooms, everything you can imagine, including seeing their bank cards, medical documents. And apparently there's supposed to be some blurring that happens, but it fails constantly. So there's some whistleblowers came forward and basically said that that's what they were seeing. And apparently that Meta is saying that this is disclosed in the privacy policy. Technically, they're correct because there is one little line that basically says, let me see if I have it here. Essentially, they said that human review would be used in certain cases. But they didn't say that that meant that humans were just going to be watching tons of footage to help the AI perform properly. Terrible. And they hid this issue. So just unbelievable that this would happen. What a scandal. Now we'll end it on a small light note, which is kind of interesting. A company called Revenue Cat is hiring an agentic AI developer. Okay, great. Someone who does AI development, right? No, actually, they're hiring an agent. They're hiring an AI. What it means is they want somebody who has built the right agent to give them the agent, and they're going to pay for that agent $10,000 a month. So it's a salary being paid. It's being paid to a human, but the salary is for AI agent that they're trying to hire. Really interesting. Are we entering a new world where there's going to be job postings hiring AI agents? There's going to be AI agents. There's going to be like a Fiverr of AI or an Upwork of AI where you can hire people's AI agent and, pay there. And if so, is that going to open up a whole avenue of some form of cryptocurrency like agent crypto, where you're not actually paying in dollars, you're paying in like agent fees, and maybe it's somehow connected to electricity tokens? It's really interesting world what this could open up. Are you going to have AI trading and buying other AI products? One AI agent needs another AI agent, and so it goes and finds them and hires that AI agent. This already happens to an extent with API calls, but you could actually really enter a world where there's actually a place like an Upwork or like a Fiverr where AI agents are swapping services back and forth. And do we then give them their own money? And there's a conversion rate, and they're using some form of crypto, using some sort of like Web3 blockchain to understand all of this. Pretty interesting world. Where do you think that's headed? We're going to end the episode here, and we'll do another one of these soon. We're starting to get some good feedback for these. So if you enjoy this, if you want to see more of these, please leave a comment. This is a very young channel. We are looking at potentially doing these more often if people tend to like them.